Okay, so get this. We're going deep on a story about disability rights and access to services.
Okay.
Specifically, sex work. It's a topic that's sparking debate all over the world.
Yeah.
And raising tons of questions about, individual autonomy and what it really means to live a full life.
It's fascinating, right? How this situation brings up all these fundamental questions about how society views disability
Right.
and sexuality.
Exactly. So let's start with a landmark legal case that happened in Australia back in 2020. The federal court ruled that a person with a disability could actually use their National Disability Insurance Scheme funding, which is known as NDIS,
NDIS.
for sex work. It
Wow.
was huge. They classified it as a reasonable and necessary support.
This case really shook things up because it directly challenged this idea
Right.
that people with disabilities aren't entitled to the same sexual rights and freedoms as everyone else.
Yeah.
You know.
It was a major win for recognizing their agency and autonomy, right?
Right.
It finally acknowledged their full humanity and their right to, explore their sexuality.
Yeah.
Make choices about their own bodies.
Absolutely. And this shift from these kind of paternalistic attitudes
Yeah.
towards a more inclusive and empowering approach to disability is really crucial.
But hold on, there's a twist. Just a few years later, in July 2024,
Oh.
NDIS Minister Bill Shorten announced a ban on using NDIS funds for sex work.
Really?
Talk about a step backward.
Wow. What was the reasoning there?
Yeah, so
I mean,
the minister cited concerns about sustainability as the main reason for this policy reversal.
okay.
But advocacy groups for people with disabilities immediately slammed the decision. They saw it as a direct attack on their rights and freedoms.
Right. Makes sense.
Exactly. Groups like People with Disability Australia or PWDA
PWDA.
argued that sexual expression is like a fundamental human right. And for some people with disabilities, access to sex work can be incredibly important for their well-being.
Yeah.
And, even for just feeling human.
Feeling human. Yeah. It's such
Yeah.
a fundamental part of who we are.
And what's also important to note is that this debate isn't unique to Australia.
Right.
In fact, countries like Denmark and the Netherlands have a totally different approach.
Interesting.
They actually fund access to sex work for people with disabilities
Wow.
as part of their healthcare system.
That's amazing. So it's like built into their system.
Yeah, it highlights this stark contrast, right?
Yeah.
In approaches to disability and sexuality.
Yeah. You got like,
On one hand, you have a model centered around individual choice and agency.
uh-huh.
And then on the other, you have the state stepping in
Yeah.
and saying, we're going to ensure your well-being. And we recognize sexual expression as a fundamental human right.
Wow. That's amazing. I mean, it really makes you think
Right?
about how our views on disability and sexuality directly shape policy decisions
Exactly.
and ultimately impact people's lives.
Wow, it's mind-blowing.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, are we as a society truly creating an environment where everyone feels valued, respected,
Yeah.
and empowered to live their life to the fullest?
That's the question, isn't it? It really prompts us to examine our own biases
Absolutely.
and assumptions about disability and sexuality.
Yeah,
And how they might be influencing our perspectives on this complex issue.
for sure.
So,
And how? Drum. Yeah.
there's this fear, right?
Yeah,
That if we recognize that people with disabilities have sexual needs,
yeah.
it'll unleash this Pandora's box of moral anxieties, you know?
It's like this weird thing where it's almost like we assume innocence with disability.
Exactly. Historically, there's been this strong association,
Yeah.
right, between disability and asexuality. There's this assumption
Right,
of innocence.
totally.
And
So then when the idea comes up that people with disabilities
Yeah.
are engaging in sexual activity,
yeah,
particularly through paid services,
right.
it challenges these deeply ingrained beliefs.
Absolutely. And then it raises the question of who gets to define
Right.
what's reasonable and necessary
Right.
when it comes to support services?
Exactly.
Is it a decision that should be made on an individual basis or?
Right. Or are there these blanket policies that apply to everyone?
Exactly.
This is a crucial question, I think.
Yeah.
Because it touches on this core tension
Right.
between individual rights and community values.
Yeah.
On the one hand, you have the principle of self-determination, where individuals should have the right to make their own choices
Right.
and control their own lives.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have these societal norms and beliefs
Yeah.
that can really influence policy, even if those norms are like discriminatory or outdated,
Yeah.
you know?
It's such a delicate balance. There's no easy answer.
Right.
But I think what's crucial is that we bring the voices of the people
Yes.
who are directly affected by these policies, right?
Into the
forefront. What are people with disabilities saying about their needs and desires? What are sex workers saying
Right.
about their role in providing support and companionship?
Right.
You know?
Because their lived experiences can help us move beyond these abstract arguments.
Exactly.
And grapple with the very real human implications
Exactly.
of these policy decisions.
Yeah.
Like, remember that quote
Yeah.
from the sex worker
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier? Nobody swipes right for people in wheelchairs.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
That's like a stark reminder
Yeah.
of the social isolation that
Yeah.
many people with disabilities face.
Absolutely. And how sex work can offer, like,
Yeah,
this vital source of connection and intimacy, right?
exactly.
So,
It challenges us to really examine our own biases and assumptions
yeah.
about disability and sexuality. So it makes you wonder, are we truly creating a society where everyone feels valued, respected,
Yeah.
and empowered to live a full and meaningful life?
That's the ultimate goal, isn't it?
I think so.
To create a society that embraces diversity
Yeah,
and recognizes the inherent dignity and worth
yeah.
of every individual. So,
I think open and honest conversations, just like this one,
right.
are a crucial step in that direction.
Absolutely. By engaging in respectful dialogue,
Yeah.
listening to different perspectives,
Right.
and challenging our own preconceived notions.
For
you
sure,
know?
so.
We can begin to break down the barriers that prevent people with disabilities from fully participating
Yeah,
in all aspects of life,
absolutely.
including their sexuality.
So where do we go from here? What are some potential paths forward?
Well, I think one crucial step is to continue advocating for the rights and autonomy of people with disabilities.
Right.
Like, organizations like PWBA are doing amazing work
There they are.
in this area, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Pushing for policies that promote inclusion and empowerment.
Right.
And, it's also vital to create spaces where open and honest conversations about sexuality and disability can take place without stigma or judgment.
Right.
So,
Like, there's all these amazing podcasts out there that are doing this.
right, what are some of them?
Like Disability After Dark, stripped by SIA,
Interesting.
and Have the Nerve.
Okay.
These are all great examples of platforms that are facilitating
Yeah.
these much needed discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think on a personal level,
Yeah.
it's crucial for each of us to examine our own biases and assumptions
Right.
about disability and sexuality. Are we approaching these topics with empathy, understanding, and a willingness to learn?
Right. It's about challenging those ingrained societal norms
Yeah,
that often lead to exclusion and discrimination.
absolutely.
And it's recognizing that people with disabilities
Yeah.
have the same desires.
Needs and rights as everyone else.
Yeah.
And this includes the right to explore their sexuality and experience intimacy.
Absolutely. And it's also essential to consider, the wider context of sex work
Right.
and the debate around its legalization and regulation.
Yeah.
Like, how do those discussions intersect with the needs and concerns of people with disabilities?
That's a really important point. I mean, the legal and ethical landscape
Right.
surrounding sex work is so complicated,
Yeah.
and it's constantly evolving.
Exactly.
It's crucial to ensure that the voices of people with disabilities are heard
Yeah.
and their rights are protected
Yeah.
within this broader context.
Absolutely. And we also need to remember access to information and resources
Yes.
is vital. People with disabilities need to be informed about their rights,
Right?
the services that are available to them, and how to advocate for their needs.
Absolutely. It's about empowering individuals
Yeah.
to make informed choices
Exactly.
about their own lives
Yeah.
and to feel confident in expressing their sexuality
Yeah.
without shame
Mhm.
or fear of judgment.
Absolutely. And that empowerment comes from creating a society where disability is not seen as a limitation,
Right.
but as part of the rich tapestry of human experience.
Yes, a society where everyone has the opportunity
Right.
to live a full and meaningful life on their own terms.
Yes.
That's a vision worth striving for.
It certainly is. And it requires ongoing dialogue,
Yes.
education, and a commitment to challenging the status quo.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
Let's keep asking those tough questions.
Yeah.
Listening to diverse perspectives. And working together to create a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Absolutely. And, as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this complex issue, I think it's important to circle back to the international context we touched on earlier, looking at how other countries approach. This intersection of disability and sexuality and sex work can offer valuable insights and broaden our perspectives, right?
Sure. You mentioned that countries like Denmark and the Netherlands actually incorporate funding for sex work services for people with disabilities into their healthcare systems.
That's right. These countries view access to sexual expression as a fundamental human right.
Yeah.
And they recognize that for some individuals with disabilities, sex work can be like a key part of their overall well-being.
Yeah. It's a stark contrast to what we're currently seeing in Australia.
It certainly is. Their model really challenges us, to rethink our own assumptions and explore different ways of supporting the needs and desires of people with disabilities.
It raises all these questions about how we define essential services and who gets to make those decisions. Is it solely about physical needs? Or should we also consider emotional and psychological well-being?
Exactly. And how do cultural norms and societal attitudes influence those decisions?
Right. It's a fascinating comparison. It really highlights the diversity of approaches to social support and inclusion.
Absolutely.
It makes me think about the role of education and open dialogue in shifting societal perceptions. The more we talk about these issues, the more we can break down stigma.
Absolutely.
And promote understanding.
Conversations like this are so important.
Yes.
By sharing information, listening to diverse perspectives, challenging our own biases, we can create a more inclusive and accepting society.
Exactly. And ultimately, that's what this is all about, right? Ensuring that everyone, regardless of ability, have the opportunity to live a full and meaningful life.
Precisely. It's about recognizing the inherent dignity and worth of every individual and creating a society where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to make choices about their own lives.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder. So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought-provoking question to ponder.
As we move forward, it's crucial to ask ourselves, how can we ensure that policy decisions actually reflect the needs and desires of those they're meant to serve?
Right.
Especially when it comes to sensitive and personal matters like sexuality.
Thanks for diving deep with us on this complex, important topic. We hope you'll learn something new. And feel inspired to keep exploring.
The power of the disability.